All right. Good evening, everyone. And tonight is a Purim class. Close to my favorite time of the year. I still think Sukkot and Simchas Torah is the very, very top, but Purim is also a special day on the Jewish calendar. And Purim, the way into tonight's class. Tonight's class the topic is about anti-Semitism, which I think is a current topic. Unfortunately, it's an area of concern for people around the world, in America here as well, with the recent bomb threats and the JCC and the desecration of Jewish cemeteries and the concern about rise of anti-Semitism type of thing. So officially the topic is about a Jewish response to anti-Semitism and the lesson that we can learn from the Purim story. Now, Purim, even though this is a kind of a heavy topic for addressing anti-Semitism, Purim really, in practice, is a very happy holiday, right? It's a lot of joy. Now, we see this through many of the practices, many of the customs and mitzvahs of Purim. We're busy in my house making Hamans so that cookies that we can give out for Shalach Manos. The food gifts that we give to our friends. My children are putting the finishing touches on their costumes. It's a time we dress up and we celebrate with parties. The shul has a double header, Saturday night and Sunday with times to celebrate together. We have a festive meal, and there's even something unique about this festive meal. Now, the unique element of the festive meal of Purim is that the joy that is meant to be manifest in the Purim meal is different than all the other meals throughout the year. Different than the joy of all the other meals throughout the year. Now, how do we see that? So the Talmud actually tells us this. That's text number 1 in tonight's class. So text number 1 is a quote from Tractate Megillah in the Talmud, which is the tractate dedicated to the holiday of Purim. And this is something you guys are familiar with, being in my class for a long time. We've learned this on the Shabbos morning class a few times, but it says, quotes Rava from the Gemara and says, it is the duty of a person to mellow themselves with wine. I like that translation. Yeah. Mellow themselves with wine on Purim until they cannot tell the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai.
That's the first time I've heard them use the word mellow.
Yeah. Usually translated as get drunk.
Yeah.
So mellow themselves with wine, and now this is, as we learned in the Shabbos morning class, this is actually a halachic statement. This is not an ethical teaching. This is not some kind of theoretical insight. This is actually a halachic ruling of what a person is supposed to do on Purim. When we have the mitzvah of having a Purim meal, one of the halachic details, one of the details in the Code of Jewish Law is this concept of drinking past conscious awareness. I think in the colloquial term, blacking out, right?
Yeah.
So it's evident from this halachic perspective, evident from this Jewish legal perspective that the joy of Purim is unique. Now, there's many other happy occasions throughout the calendar, thank God. There's many other holidays. But from this first text, we see that the joy of Purim is different. Now, the first question for tonight's class, we have a few, but the first question for tonight's class is why? Why is Purim different? How is it different? There's the joke, I think, captures the essence of Jewish holidays, right? They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. That captures you. It's pretty safe. That covers, in summary, all the holidays. So if all the holidays are happy and they're kind of along the same story arc, what is so special about Purim? Why does Purim have this unique status of unbridled joy? Of a joy in the meal that goes beyond our conscious awareness. Now, that brings us to our next text, which is the main sicha, the main teaching of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which tonight's class is based off of. It's from Sichas Kodesh, which is one of the books which captures the Rebbe's public addresses. And this is from the year 5726 on the Jewish calendar, which means it was 51 years ago in Purim. So let's see what the Rebbe teaches us. It says, regarding the festivals, we know that they are holidays of joy. Moyadim l'simcha in Hebrew. A joy that is in fact an active scriptural mitzvah. By contrast, the joy of Hanukkah and Purim are of rabbinic nature. Nevertheless, it is specifically regarding the festival of Purim that we find an injunction to be joyous to the extent that one can no longer distinguish. That was text number 1 from the Gemara, Tractate Megillah. It's an injunction that we don't even find regarding the festivals that are scriptural of nature. So the Rebbe asked our question, why is this so? What's different about Purim? So we have an image over here of pouring out a glass of wine and the party hats, really celebrating. So we see from text number 1, from the mitzvah of Ad lo yodo, to drink until you don't know the difference, that this is unique amongst the happy occasions of throughout the year. Now, the next part that makes it unique, let's say that, let's think about it about like maybe depth and breadth, right? So the first thing we saw that was unique about Purim is the depth of the joy. That it's not just any holiday that we're happy about all of them, but it's like we go even deeper, that this joy goes beyond our conscious state. Now, that's one way of thinking about the unique element of Purim. Another way of thinking about the unique element of Purim is the breadth. Who's included in the joy? Now, here, the slide tells us that children are very much a part of the joy of Purim. So we cast a wider net, so to say, of who's celebrating and enjoying themselves in Purim. And both examples I gave before, it was all the activity my children are undertaking to get ready for Purim. Because Purim is very much a holiday that includes children. And they're the ones with the costumes, and they're so excited, and giving gifts. And in my family, it's kind of manifests itself in that we spend the whole day driving around, giving out shalach manos, 5 hours worth of driving and going from house to house. And it's the one time I let them just eat whatever they want in the car the whole time, like by the end of the shalach manos driving, the car's covered in candy wrappers and empty bottles and like that. And the kids know once a year, wow, this is our chance, So
like any minivan in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. So what is it about Purim that makes it so boundless in joy, both in depth as well as in breadth? So what we're going to do in order to address these first two questions is search for details in the Purim story itself for answers. What's so unique about the joy of Purim? All right, so that brings us to the next text. The next text 3a, is from the Megillah Esther, chapter 3, verse 2. Now, we all kind of know the story, but it's worth doing a quick review. Haman is the wicked advisor to the king. And Haman has been elevated to near royal status in the Persian Empire. He's second in command to Ahasuerus as an advisor. Now, as the way he exerted his power and his status was that he made this decree that whenever he is seen in public, people are to bow down to him. That's the official response to being in his presence, is you have to bow down to him. Now, this level of respect, this level of authority and power, he pushes forward, and this causes a conflict because Mordechai, another advisor to Ahasuerus, refuses to bow down to Haman. We have this a lot, right? In world power struggles, someone grabs power and they are trying to secure that power, and anybody who challenges it is a threat. So that's what we find ourselves in the story, that Mordechai refuses to bow down to Haman, and this is a conflict. So text 3a, which is chapter 3, verse 2 of the book of Esther. It says, all the king's servants at the king's gate kneeled and bowed down before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning it. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow. So this is an initial point of conflict in the story between Haman and Mordecai, that Haman got Ahasuerus to issue this decree, what do we call it nowadays? An executive order, right? So imagine if Steve Bannon got Trump to sign an executive order that everybody has to bow down to him when he walks into the West Wing, and then all of a sudden, like, Kellyanne Conway won't do it, right? And and now there's conflict, and they're on Fox Morning News, bashing each other, whatever is going on. So that's how we could kind of imagine what's going on over here. Maybe not Kellyanne Conway, maybe better Jared Kushner or something would be in the role.
Yeah.
So imagine that's what's happening. So in the Purim story, the question is, why won't Mordecai bow down to Haman? What's the reason? Now the next text 3b, we have Rashi on this verse, saying that they would kneel and bow and prostrate themselves. So Rashi explains why Mordecai wouldn't, is because he made himself a god, he meaning Haman. And therefore, Mordecai would neither kneel nor prostrate himself. Rashi's pointing out on the story that this is a matter of idol worship. If Haman's going to carry himself around like a god and make everybody bow down to him, then that's forbidden. That's forbidden idol worship. So he can't do it. That's the first answer. Now, the next answer, which is quoted from the same place, but by the Ibn Ezra, which was another biblical commentary, which we've been quoting from more recently, and what he explains is not exactly that Haman is an idol himself, but the prohibition is still there because Haman was adorned with idols. So we see that in text number 4. It says, and quoting again the words, would kneel and prostrate themselves, and our sages famously expanded on this verse, the Ibn Ezra explains, stating that Haman had a graven image, either on his clothing or on his turban, right? So this same concept, as Rashi is pointing out, explains the Jewish legal reason why Mordecai can't bow down to Haman. In both explanations, it's that he would be bowing down to an idol, and this is against his faith. Now, the third answer, which is text number 5, the third answer is the midrashic explanation, meaning it's some of the story behind the story. Now, we'll soon read it, but the idea over here is that this is a role reversal. See, part of why Haman, some of the motivation behind why Haman is asserting himself now that he's attained this powerful position, why he's asserting himself, is because really he comes from a weak background. Haman, the story tells us, had sold himself once upon a time as a slave to Mordecai. So when he was a slave, that's as low as it gets. And now he's managed through his political machinations to get to the top, and he wants to assert himself. And any challenge to that power reminds him of his former state. And that causes the rage. Let's see that text number 5, the way the Medrash explains it. It happened once that the king sent Mordecai and Haman on a mission to conquer a certain territory and give them some money. And gave them some money. Not that's why they're going to conquer the territory, but rather in preparation to conquer the territory, they've been given money by the king. Haman took his portion of the money and spent it all. When they arrived and needed to spend the money on food, Haman had nothing left, whereas Mordecai still had his half of the money. Haman approached Mordecai and asked him, "Lend me some of the money that you have." Mordecai replied, "I will not lend you the money until you sell yourself to me." Haman accepted, borrowed the money, and wrote, "Haman is the servant of Mordecai." Haman essentially sold his life to Mordecai for a loaf of bread. So this is a profound role reversal, going from slave with a bond, saying that you've been sold into slavery, to second to the king. And who knows that he's a slave? Who can remind him of his former disadvantaged status? Mordecai. Who's not bowing down to him? Mordechai. So the Medrash gives us more like the backstory and explains the emotional content of Mordechai's refusal. Rashi and Ibn Ezra are explaining it's a technical problem. It's a pretty big technical problem for Jewish religion. He's made himself into an idol. Of course I can't bow down to him. But the Medrash gives it a little more flavor to us to understand, the emotional stakes in the story.
Is that, is that just for sake of explanation, or was it written someplace in the history that he was a slave to Mordecai?
Yeah, so this source, you're saying, like, where do they get it from? Well, the way that we understand it traditionally is that the Medrash is the recording of the oral tradition for the Bible. So here, you have the canonization of the biblical text was done by the rabbis, and the rabbis were the guardians of the oral tradition. So many of the same rabbis that were involved in the making the final version, let's say, of the biblical texts were the ones that also authored midrashic stories as well. Now, going back to our question, regardless of whatever it was that was Mordechai's motivation, why he wouldn't bow down to Haman, we see clear from the continuation of the story that this refusal infuriated Haman. And Mordechai was actually warned that this was dangerous behavior. That's the next text in the Megillah itself. It picks up from where we left off in the previous part of chapter 3 in the book of Esther. It says, the king's servant at the gate, said to Mordechai, why do you transgress the king's command? Remember, we read before that the king was the one who authorized this decree that everyone should be bowing down to Haman. Finally, when they had said this to him day after day, and he did not listen to them, they informed Haman to see if Mordechai's words would endure. For he had told them that he would never bow, because he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow before him, Haman was filled with wrath. He thought it contemptible, the Megillah tells us, to kill only Mordechai, for they had informed him of Mordechai's nation. So Haman sought to annihilate all the Jews, the nation of Mordechai, throughout Achashverosh's entire kingdom. Now here's the next batch of questions, so to say. The next first batch is what's so special about Purim? Why is this boundless joy, both in depth and breadth? What's so special, different than all the other holidays? So the next batch of questions is on, once we've gone into the details of the story in order to find our answer to the first batch. So now our second batch of questions is, this logic of Haman's seems flawed. We're going to have to dig deeper to understand what's bothering Haman. Like, why should Haman want to murder all the Jews just because Mordechai is not bowing down?
The reasoning for Mordechai is not bowing down is that the Jews would not idol worship.
Right.
Every Jew would be in the same situation.
Good. That's a good point. It's a good first answer for sure. And it also gives us a good reason for your question, why do we need the difference of the Medrash to what Rashi's saying? Because the Medrash kind of takes some of the teeth away from that answer. It's a very good answer, but it's not really like a Jewish problem. It's a Mordechai and Haman problem, according to the Medrash. But it's a good answer. Now, from the question, why only kill Mordechai, and why do you have to kill everybody, not just Mordechai? It would seem like that would be maybe a message to the rest of the Jews, and you would keep them if you just got rid of Mordechai, the one who refuses to bow. Now, the question about it's a Jewish belief, which is true, makes the question a little bit more complicated, because it seems from the story that Mordechai is unique in not bowing down, which would mean that many of the Jews, if not all of them, were bowing down to Haman. Now that takes us to our next text, and this will help elaborate on this part of it. The next text is quoted from the Gemara that we quoted from before in the Megillah, and this text in the Gemara shows that the Jews in the time of Purim were on a low spiritual level. And from this description of their spiritual level, we can, like, so to say, deduce that they were also bowing down to Haman, and this was a unique thing for Mordechai. So let's see the next text number 7. This is from Tractate Megillah, page 12, the first side. It says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was asked by his disciples, why were the enemies of Israel in that generation deserving of extermination? Now, enemies of Israel, when you hear that the first time and read this text, you might think that this means non-Jews, right? So the explanation there in the Talmud about that term is that it's like a euphemistic expression for the Jews, you know, the enemy within, so to say. So let's reread it without the euphemism. Why were the Jews in that generation deserving of extermination? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said to them, he answered, go ahead, answer yourselves, you know. You tell me the answer to your question. So they responded, because they partook of the feast of that wicked one. So let's deconstruct this Talmudic back and forth, what's going on over here. Partaking of the feast of the wicked one means they ate at Achashverosh's feast. Now this is a code in the Talmudic language over here for assimilation. What was the feast of Achashverosh? There was this prophecy that after the Babylonian destruction of the temple and the first exile after the Jewish people after the destruction of the temple, that they would be destined to return to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple after 70 years. Now, some classic history is that the Babylonians were the ones who destroyed the temple, and the Babylonians were the ones who were conquered by the Persians. So the Persians have, so to say, like a borrowed rule or a recently conquered rule over the Jews. They're not the ones to have conquered them. So here they're kind of like stepping into a prophecy that they're bound to lose the Jews. Now another one of these like miscalculations of like what does 70 years mean? They miscalculated and felt that the 70 years had already gone by and the prophecy was false. The Jews weren't going to be returning. So Achashverosh and he was celebrating. What was he celebrating at the party? The fact that the Jews were never going to go back to Israel. And the captured vessels of the temple, which the Babylonians took back to Babylon, that was now Persian spoil and was being brought out in the party as a way of celebrating. Look, we're celebrating the fact that Jews are never going home. Let's use their temple vessels to drink, you know, and to have a celebration. So for the Jews to go to that celebration and partake of the feast means that they really embrace the fact that they're Persian now more than they're Jewish. Now, so if the Talmud, so this is the deduction, if the Talmud is telling us that this is the reason why they have the decree of Haman against the destruction of all the Jews, why did they desert such a decree? It's because they've sunk to a low level. So if they've sunk to this low level, then we could deduce that they also were Persian enough to take Achashverosh's decree that they should bow down to Haman. So it's not explicit, I'll give you that, but if we can make this deduction, if Mordechai was exceptional in his behavior, enough that the book says that he's the one who's not bowing down, then now we still have our question. Why should his unique defiance lead to the death of all the Jews? Now, I think your answer, because I've already prepared the class, is a good answer. We're going to come back to how good of an answer it is, but at least in the surface in the story so far, it doesn't describe the behavior of the Jewish people. All right, so that's part one. We built up a question. The first series of questions is what's so special about Purim? Why do we drink and beyond the state of awareness and consciousness, you know, in our expression of joy? Why is it for men, women, children, you know, why is it so widely celebrated beyond the other holidays? And in order to understand that, we got into some details of the story, which is this whole Mordechai and Haman tension with Mordechai not bowing down to Haman. All right, any questions before we proceed?
I have one question. Okay,
Sure.
so this is an excerpt from Daniel
Which part?
about the handwriting on the wall.
That's
Is that party?
no,
It's not,
no. That was a Babylonian party.
That was another 70 years.
That was when Babylon fell.
Okay.
Yeah. That according to biblical tradition, that's when the Babylon fell to the Persians that night.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to turn in part 2 to another detail in the laws of Purim that'll help us answer the question about Mordechai and Haman and why Haman wants to kill all the Jews because of Mordechai's defiance. All right, so in order to understand this detail of Purim, I have to give a little bit of background information. We have a category of mitzvahs which is called, keep it in English, they're time-bound mitzvahs. So let's give you an example. We have a time-bound mitzvah to put on tefillin. So you're supposed to put on tefillin in the morning. Now, tzitzis, the talis, you're supposed to put on talis throughout the day because the mitzvah says to see them. And so seeing is when it's light outside and not when it's dark. So since it's a time-bound mitzvah, then there are exemptions to the performance of the mitzvah. Positive commandments that are time-bound carry with them an exemption that women don't have to fulfill the mitzvah. Men and not women are obligated in all the time-bound mitzvahs. Women have an exemption. Now, there are certain exceptions. So this holiday, this coming up, Purim, has certain time-bound observances. For instance, we're supposed to read the Megillah, both at nighttime and in the day. So you have to read it twice. So and once in night. So meaning if the sun goes down and it becomes Purim this year, Saturday night, and you miss the reading, and so the sun comes up Sunday morning, then you've missed a time-bound part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So since it's a time-bound mitzvah, we would normally have this exemption that women wouldn't have to hear the Megillah. But what's unique about the observance is that in Purim, the mitzvah, even though it's time-bound, is incumbent on women to hear as well. So that's text number 8. Text number 8, oops, forgot my review slide. Let's just do the quick review. So even though I jumped ahead, but Mordechai was defiant; he wouldn't bow. Haman got mad about this. This is giving us the review of their beef that they had going between the two of them. And our question is: this is a personal problem for Haman. Then why should all the Jews be killed? All right. So now it's text number 8. So explaining this unique time-bound performance of the mitzvah, it says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also said, women are under the obligation to read the Megillah. So this is unique. And why? For they too were part of the miracle. And Rashi explains in the brackets, as the decree of annihilation was extended on all men, women, and children of all ages. And therefore, since they were part of the mitzvah, part of the miracle, they also have the mitzvah uniquely. So now is kind of another twist in the logic behind why women are obligated into addressing what's with Haman's decree. Why does he want to kill everybody, not just Mordechai? Why would Haman want to kill children? And so what could they have done wrong? They don't even have yet any agency in picking to adhere to Jewish values, right? They're just kids. So the Rebbe, it's back to the Sichos Kodesh we quoted from before. The Rebbe asks the same question. He said, it's extremely puzzling. Haman sought revenge for Mordechai's refusal to bow down to him. Now, one can understand that to just harm Mordechai, the head of the Sanhedrin, would not be sufficient for Haman. But how did he arrive at the women and children? He should have plotted against the Sanhedrin. Perhaps the other leaders of Israel, the scholars. But why the women and children? What association do they have to such a terrible decree? Now, to answer this, the Rebbe is going to point out, to find the answer, is if we go back to the text 3, I think it is, where it quotes further in chapter 3 of Megillah Esther, it says that they had informed him, they informed Haman of Mordechai's nation. So we ask, what does this mean? This is kind of like the key to our question, is also going to be the key to our answer. The question we have over there is, how does the nation get involved? How is this an issue so global, so big, between Haman and the entire Jewish people? It should just be between him and Mordechai. Mordechai is the one not bowing down. But the way that everybody's going to explain in the next text is that these words capture the core of the story. Meaning, Haman understood that even though in practicality this may have only been Mordechai not bowing down to him, this was not a personal act of defiance, along the lines of what you were saying. This was Mordechai acting in accordance with a national worldview. This is Mordechai's acting like a Jew. Now, Haman sensed this, that Mordechai's stubborn refusal was not part of who he is as an individual, but rather it's who he is as a part of a people. Now, that's the next text from the teaching of the Rebbe. It says, when he saw that Mordechai did not bow down to him, Haman thought it contemptible to only kill Mordechai. That's the quote from the text we read before. So why? That's the Rebbe's question. He continues and says, the Megillah provides the reason, for they had informed him of Mordechai's nation. So the Rebbe asks our question, what's the connection? How does the fact that he was informed of Mordechai's nation explain why killing Mordechai alone was not enough for Haman? When Haman saw that a Jew is willing to place his life in danger and not bow down to him, he began to wonder, where does such commitment stem from? Is this a rational thing? Is it an emotional thing? What is it? So as Haman is wondering about the source of this defiance, the Megillah gives us the answer. He was informed of Mordechai's nation. It was explained to him, explained to Haman, that Mordechai is not some sort of unique exception to the rule. Rather, this is Mordechai's nation. So even though in practicality, at that moment, because of the status of the Jews, he was unique. But this wasn't unique to who the people truly are. Any person belonging to this nation will defy him as well. Thus, there's no sense in killing off Mordechai when an entire nation remains who will not submit to him. Now, we still have our question then, the way I kind of fended off your answer before, which is, but the Jews are bowing down to him. If he's saying this is a national problem, the Jews won't bow down to me, but what about the Jews who did bow down to him? Why does he want their blood as well? So those who bow down to him at this point are part of the nation. So the answer, and this is where we get into like the anti-Semitic, part of the class, where we start to begin to think about it on a current events level, is that no amount of integration or assimilation, no amount of bowing down to Haman is going to eliminate this essential element of who a Jew is. And we're going to see also later, conversely, it's also not going to remove the hatred for the Jew, for Haman, meaning Haman wasn't placated by the Jews bowing down to him. Now, Mordechai publicly expressed his true self. That's the depth of what Haman perceived. When the Megillah tells us that he was mad because of his nationhood, what nation he belongs to, Haman understood the depth that Mordechai was the one actually expressing who he is. And not just by what he does, he's expressing who he is. Now, that's the next text that I was teaching. It says, when the average Jew realized that this is something that touches to the extent of bowing down, at that point, even the Jew who assimilated and partook of Achashverosh's party understood that bowing is at stake. At such a point, that Jew was immediately shaken and stood committed to the point of self-sacrifice for the entire year. So let's stop there just for a second. What the Rebbe is saying is that it was possible for the Jews to bow down when they didn't think of it as such a consequential act, because they were assimilated as Persians. They were part of their exile now. That was part of their identity. It was a decree, and what's the big deal? It was only afterwards, once Mordechai made this stand with his conviction, that they realized, yeah, bowing down is a serious matter. And once Mordechai's action of defiance was met by a decree saying it's against the whole Jews, because Haman realizes this is what being Jewish is all about. Mordechai's action, what Jewish is all about. When Haman realized that what's at stake, it's also communicated to the Jews what's at stake. So even though a Jew may have bowed down yesterday, but now that he realized what's at stake, that arouses in even those who bow down the understanding that this is in fact a challenge to my essence. And now they don't want to bow down anymore. So what then, the Rebbe says, is this point that defies the command to bow down to Haman? Like what got woken up in every Jew now? So the Rebbe's answer is it's the Pintele Yid. That's a Yiddish expression. The Pintele Yid, which is the core of the Jew, which is whole and complete in every Jew. For child to elder alike, from child to elder alike. It is whole in the exact same manner, because it is part of the Jew. It is literally a part of God. So, nice picture, right? She's showing her heart, her essence over here. So what we're saying, to summarize that I was teaching up to now, is that Haman, when we're told that he's mad because of the nation that Mordechai belonged to, it wasn't that like everybody in this nation was acting this way. He realized that Mordechai's actions were essential of this nation. Now, then this is a deeper truth at this moment than even the rest of the Jews necessarily understood. They were acting in a way which is outwardly contrary to their essence, but then once they woke up to realize the stakes, that point was always there all along. So now, according to this, and we're going to go with one more text instead I was teaching, now according to this reading of the story, of this reading of the conflict between Haman and Mordechai, now we can begin to understand the source of the joy and why Purim is such a uniquely joyous holiday and unique in its observance of joy. That's the next text. And it's still quoted from the Rebbe's teaching. It says, Purim evoked the Pintele Yid. It evoked with this point, which is equally present within every single Jew. Thus, from the elderly to the young, men, women, whatever it is, we ought to be equally happy. Indeed, for this reason, only with regards to Purim do we find that the joy is to exceed all boundaries. So this essential point, which can't be defined, you can't, in a limited way, celebrate reaching that point. The most appropriate way to celebrate reaching your essence is to be boundless in your celebration. When it comes to Purim, or is it a theme? Sorry, not Purim. When it comes to Pesach, there's a theme, right? Freedom. Freedom is a deep idea, but it's kind of, let's call it layered on top of essence. So it's appropriate to celebrate it by 4 cups of wine, right? That's a limit. I mean, it already feels like an unlimited amount for some people, but after all, it's a limit. It's 4 cups. Purim is this unique holiday where what's the theme? What's the idea? Essence. The Pintele Yid, the way I was teaching. For that, there's no way to celebrate. There's no way to limit the celebration. That explains the limitless joy. Okay. So this summary slide I won't forget. Okay, so the summary slide over here is that we see that now we understand what it means, Mordechai's people, that he's part of a nation. The true idea over here, the true joy, is that since Purim reached the essence, it reached the core of every Jew, the Pintele Yid, we celebrate it until today in an essential way, beyond understanding. Boundlessly, men, women, children, everybody. Okay, any questions for part 2? No orange bubbles
Nope.
indicating questions from at-home listeners. All right, let's get then to the practical application. Now, the idea when we say about the practical application is that we can find inspiration on what it means to be a Jew in the world in 2017 from the Purim story of what unfolded in Persia thousands of years ago. Now, what it means to be a Jew, and that's the title of the class, the Jewish response to anti-Semitism, is like, how do we respond to hatred now? Again, as I said at the beginning, we're talking about a rise in anti-Semitic attacks even here in this country. Bomb threats, the JCC right down the street. And, how are we supposed to respond to this hatred? Now, one, let's call it natural response to threats and hatred is conflict avoidance, right? If you know somebody hates you and they're threatening your safety, it makes perfect sense just to avoid that person, right? Don't be in their face. Don't wave your flag, here I am, just avoid the conflict, lay low. So we can see from the story over here, though, that wasn't the message that Mordechai was communicating. Mordechai was essentially provoking Haman by not bowing down to him. If we would take the conflict avoidance approach, okay, I can't bow down to Haman, he's an idol, or he's wearing idols, but I don't have to be around while he's coming. I could have some advance notice. I could research Haman's schedule, and wherever he's going to go down Main Street, I could be somewhere else. Then I don't have the problem of bowing down to him. I don't have to stand in his face with this defiance. Now, but Mordechai realized, and in this story, the way we are analyzing it and that I was teaching it, is that Mordechai really understood that for Haman, and this Purim story, as well as all the Hamans throughout history, it doesn't make a difference if you bow down or you don't. That's another wrinkle in the story, is that even though it was only Mordechai that wouldn't bow down, Haman understood that's a bigger thing than just Mordechai. And Haman wanted to kill even the Jews that did bow down. So this tension between essence and behavior, if we try to behave in a way that avoids conflict or blends in so as not to be the target of hatred, it's not going to matter. And that's what the message from the Megillah is teaching us. Now, why is that? What's the bigger notions that this is teaching us? So one of the bigger notions is that, I heard this once, I may have even said it a couple times in this class, but I heard this from Rabbi Feller, who's a senior, one of the first American shluchim sent out by the Rebbe. He was the senior shliach to the state of Minnesota. And a lot of great stories, and I had the opportunity to sit with him in Fabrang for a while, and he told this story about how in American public schools, there's like a whole section of study about the Second World War, and a part of the curriculum is the Holocaust, right? So you cover the Second World War, you go over the thing, you read a couple books. So one of the books to understand a little bit about Judaism in American public schools is The Chosen, right? Chaim Potok. So, I mean, what is it, like around junior high school, if I remember correctly, or maybe early high school, you read The Chosen, and Diary of Anne Frank is another one. And
there's a movie made.
Yeah, the movie with Robbie Benson, in The Chosen. So Rabbi Feller was saying, when it comes to that time of the year, when they're covering that part of the curriculum and all these American kids are reading about The Chosen, he gets a call many times from the school, because here he is, an authentic Hasidic Jew in their midst. He's like the character in the book, a Hasidic rabbi with a long coat and a long beard. So he gets called to come to the school and speak. So he described that one of the objectives that he has when he goes to speak, besides just being like a living, artifact of Hasidic Jewry, his objective that he has is he wants to communicate the idea of what is a Jew really. So he says one of the approaches that he takes when he's called to speak to such an audience is he asks, plays word association. Like, when I say a Jew, what comes to mind? So it goes through that, and you can think for yourself. When I say the word Jewish, what comes to mind? A Jew, you know. He talked about how, you know, things like money might come out, or big nose, or, you know, stereotypical things like, or iconic imagery like bagels and Hanukkah, whatever it is. Again, we're talking about American high school students, you know, at public school. What's the association they have with a Jew? And he says that his objective when he goes there and what he teaches them after asking them this question is that the real association that we're meant to have with the word Jew is God. That when the essence we're talking about here, this Pintele Yid, the essence of the Jew, the association is that when you think Jew, the immediate association you should make is God. The life, the belief, the actions, the words, everything about a Jew should reinforce this association. So Rabbi Feller talked practically in this Harengen. He said, you know, what does he do? When he goes to the bank and somebody asks him, how are you today? He says, I'm doing good, thank God. And then he says to the person, the teller, you know, the bank, did you thank God today? You know, because you don't always hear back from someone you ask how you're doing, thank God. You know, now you have to not just say something strange, like get the person to actively think, did you thank God today? So this is his mission. He sees it as like, and it's the mission of every Jew, that our association in this world should be to bring the awareness of God to the world. Now, why do I tell that whole story over here? We're going back to Haman and his hate for the Jews and the actions of Mordechai standing up. What is it that Haman understood? Haman understood this association, that the Jew in his essence represents God. And as such, in this world, representing God means that there's a humility. There's a humble approach that I am just the servant of God. I'm here to do God's will. So there's a certain humility and submission that goes hand in hand with this association. Now, Haman, when we think from this, you know, kind of theoretical perspective, then if the Jew equals God, which equals humility and submission, then Haman represents arrogance and power. When Rashi is telling us that Haman made himself into an idol, he's not submitting to God, you know. He's not humble. He's lifting himself up in this position of power to show that he's a God. So from this very high perspective, Haman, as a powerful, arrogant person, it's a direct contradiction to who he is, that there should be a Jew. If there should be a Jew, if there should be such a nation that they represent God in a way of humility and submission, then that's a direct contradiction to who he is as someone powerful and arrogant. The Jew is in direct conflict with his identity. As such, then he has to eradicate them. Their continued existence is a refutation to his assertion of power. Now, Mordechai understood that assimilation is not the answer to that anti-Semitism. He couldn't hide and not provoke Haman. He understood that instead he had to assert who he is. And Haman realized, and even if you don't assert who you are, as long as you have that essential connection to God, then you're a threat to me. Now, that brings us to text number 10. Like, where does the strength that Mordechai had to stand in defiance, to live in accordance with his essence, where does that come from? You know, if we're talking about practical application, how do we respond in the face of anti-Semitism? We're saying that the lesson from the story is we have to respond with pride. We have to respond with, you know, power. This is who we are. Now, where does that come from? So the next teaching, text 10 and 11, we're going to see is a fascinating story of what gave Mordechai faith, what gave him conviction in the story. And we'll just read it. It's because it's a little bit long. It says, this is from the Midrash Esther Rabbah. It says, when the letters ordaining the decree against the Jews had been duly sealed by the king, and delivered to Haman's hands, Haman and all his comrades went strolling with jovial hearts and encountered Mordecai, right? Kind of like rubbing it in his face. Just then, Mordecai had caught sight of 3 little boys on their way home from school. He hastened toward them, and Haman and his band followed him so that they could hear what he was going to ask them. When Mordecai caught up to the young pupils, he said to one of them, "Recite me your verse. Tell me what you just learned." The little boy promptly recited the verse he had just learned at school. "Do not fear sudden terror, nor the destruction of the wicked when it comes."
Al-Tira.
Al-Tira ipachat pitom. Yeah, exactly. In our prayers that we say every day at the end of prayers. The second little boy spoke up and said, "I studied scripture today, and this is the verse I just reached at school. Contrive a scheme, but it will be foiled. Conspire a plot, but it will not materialize, for God is with us." That's the next part of that prayer. Now you know where it comes from.
Right.
And the third little boy said, "To your old age I am with you. To your hoary years I will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you and deliver you." Real familiar, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, easy.
Yeah. So when Mordecai heard these responses, he smiled and rejoiced. Haman asked him, Haman's here to taunt him, right? He has a signed decree of this destruction. And here, Mordecai goes to some kids, hears some verses, and he's already happy in the face of the decree. Haman asked him, "What makes you so happy about what these children said?" Replied Mordecai, "I'm happy because of the glad tidings they told me, that I should not be afraid of the evil plot that you contrived against us." Hearing these words, the wicked Haman flew into a rage and declared, "The very first ones whom I will destroy shall be these children." So, from this exchange that Rebbe derives, and we're going to go back to the Rebbe's teaching soon, but from this exchange, and that the Medrash describes, the Rebbe learns from this that the real solution to anti-Semitism, the real solution to hatred, has nothing to do with compromise, has nothing to do with blending in. The pride that is necessary to respond to the hatred of anti-Semitism comes, what's the source of it? It comes from the education of our children. This Medrash is teaching us a very profound lesson. Mordecai and Haman is a battle, God versus arrogance, humility versus arrogance. Haman's assertion of power, that he is powerful, he's a god, is contradicted by the existence of what Mordecai represents. Mordecai realizes he can't hide that representation, and even if he will, it won't matter. It'll always be in contradiction to what Haman represents. So he has to stand up and be proud of that essence. And where does that pride come from? The Medrash tells us it comes from education. When we educate ourselves, when we educate our children, and two together, right? There's a child within each and every one of us. There's a simple child in each and every one of us. We have to educate that child. That is us. When we do that, that is the secret to the pride which is necessary to answer the threat of anti-Semitism. For the Jews to face all the Hamans of these thousands of years, not just one, right? Like I said, they tried to kill us, we win, now let's eat. There's more than one of those holidays. So the Hamans throughout history have all been bent on destroying the awareness of God. And it's up to us to stand up. And where do we find the strength to stand up? Through education. So that's what the Rebbe speaks about in the next slide. It says, where does Jewish education start? A Jewish child's education begins with the knowledge that he or she has nothing to be afraid of, despite the fact that we are the tiniest of all nations. Immediately in infancy, the child is told, Al Tira, do not fear. There's nothing to be afraid of. Thereafter, as the child grows and matures to a more advanced level, we tell them, whereas God has granted you with the highest form of all capabilities, namely the power of intellect, we ought to use that intellect to best see how to counter the schemes and plots of our adversaries. And as he or she is now a thinking person, they already know that the true explanation for our survival is for God is with us. Our survival is not hinged on the fact that he or she is a great scholar per se, rather simply on the fact that God is with us. That foundation is where you start. It builds up on pride. You have to also use your intelligence, but you have to, it's because you have that foundation, you realize it's not your intelligence alone. It's not just because you're so clever that you're going to survive. You need to use that, but the foundation is always there. The foundation is that Jewish education, that knowledge, that pride, that you have an essential bond to God, that you are a part of a message, which is the truth of God. That brings us to the last text of the night, which is the last quote from the Rebbe. It says, when Mordechai saw that this is the type of education the Jewish children emerge with from their Jewish school, he was extremely happy. When Haman asked him what he had heard, he told him, I was told good news. So the Rebbe explains what that medrash is telling us. It says, for one child had told him that his verses do not fear sudden terror. A second child said his verses contrive a scheme, but it'll be foiled. And yet a third child said that his verses, to your old age, I will sustain you and deliver you. Hearing this, hearing that this is what the children are being educated with, Mordechai was certain that he did not need to even think twice about Haman's evil plots. Thus, when Haman heard this, he understood exactly where his true battle lay. He understood that if he wanted his plan to accomplish anything, he must start with the children. If he would begin with a different segment of the Jewish people and leave the children alone with their education, his plot would be purposeless. This, then, is a lesson for all time. And that's the practical application. This beautiful message of the story of Purim is that we have a boundless celebration. This boundless celebration is a manifestation of our boundless connection to God. The core of the story is this essential connection to God. And rather than hide from it or try to blend it in and translate it to its West Bloomfield, Michigan context in 2017, we have to embrace it and be proud of this essential bond. And that pride, that conviction comes from proper education, from building a strong foundation on which to stand. And so the final slide says the child is imbued with this knowledge through Jewish education that whatever it is, God is with us. And that's the quote that the Rebbe said that we just read from. When Mordechai heard this in the story, he knew that there's nothing to worry about. So too for us, if we can build this foundation and live with this knowledge and be proud like this, then we certainly will have what to celebrate this Saturday night and this Sunday. All right, a quick review. I'm just going to do a quick review of some of the highlights of Purim, some of the things you should be aware of. So Purim starts this year on Saturday night. And like I meant, there are 4 mitzvahs. I mentioned one before about the reading of the Megillah. So there are actually 4 mitzvahs that are the rabbis decreed for Purim. So one we've said first, which is to hear the Megillah. So there's a public reading from the proper scroll. So you should try to hear the Megillah. We do have an opportunity for you to hear it here in Shul, and that's Saturday night. I believe it's 7:30, maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock.
I think it's 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock, okay. Yeah, it's getting close to Shabbos being already past 7. Yeah, 8 o'clock makes more sense. So there's a party with reading and celebration and food and everything. So that's we give you the opportunity to do that mitzvah here. There's lots of Megillah readings around town, but that's the first mitzvah. That's followed by the same mitzvah of hearing the Megillah again on Sunday. So we'll be doing that here at the Purim party and Shul, I think at 11 o'clock. Is that right? It's a brunch this year.
10:30 or 11. No.
10:30 or
10:30, I think it is.
Okay, so that there was the Megillah reading there at the Purim party at the Shul. After that first mitzvah, we have 3 more. So the 3 mitzvahs are that you should give gifts of food, and it's 2 gifts. So it means in one gift should have 2 types of food. The best way to do it is food that doesn't need any preparation. It can be eaten as is. And you should give at least 1 such gift to friends. I think at this point they've closed the Shul campaign, but we're doing that, and hundreds of packages are going out for Purim to celebrate this way. It's called Shalach Manos. So give gifts of food to your friends. Then there's a 3rd mitzvah, which is called Matanos Lavyonim, which means to give money to the poor. That says God is not pleased with a celebration that doesn't include those who are without. So if a person doesn't have the money to celebrate on Purim, we give to these funds, Matanas Lavionim, so that the poor people should have money to celebrate on Purim as well. That's mitzvah number 3. And then the mitzvah which we talked about at the beginning, which is to have a festive meal. The festive meal of Purim, this Purim, official meal to celebrate. And one of the details, like we covered here tonight, is to say a few more l'chaims than you're used to. So those are the 4 mitzvahs of Purim. There is actually one other observance of Purim worth mentioning, and then we'll wrap it up, is what's called Tainus Esther, the fast of Esther. And this year, Tainus Esther is normally, and every year, Tainus Esther is normally the day before Purim. This year is a special event on the calendar. The Purim is mostly Shabbos. Purim is Saturday night. And we're not allowed to fast this fast on Shabbos. So since Purim is fast, Tainus Esther is pushed off because of Shabbos, where should it land? Thursday is the right answer. We might think it should land on Friday because you push it to the next available day because you can't fast on Friday. But we don't fast on Friday either because of the preparations for Shabbos. So Shabbos has like a halo effect, in the day in front of it, and it is also not allowed. So we do fast Thursday. So tomorrow morning at sunrise until nightfall.
No water?
No food or water. So the fast, I believe, starts here in West Bloomfield at, I think, at 5:29 a.m. So if you do want to have water before the fast, as long as you're done ingesting before 5:29, then that's when the fast starts.
It ends at sunset.
Yeah, it ends around 7. A little after 7. All right, any questions about Purim or about the class?
I was just thinking, just recently I saw in the news, a couple months ago, there was a chief rabbi, I think he is of France. He issued a statement. They called the Jews not to wear a yarmulke for safety reasons. And there are ones that, kind of agreed and supported, saying it's potential of saving lives, probably.
Right.
And others who said that was hiding your essence and bowing to the danger.
Yeah.
So they're, but I don't know, which is, both is true.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so they're both, let's call them rational responses. What we derive from the story is the lesson that sides on one side. And one of the details saying, okay, what's the rational side of hide your yarmulke so no one attacks you? It's that if you could just hide your identity, then everything's fine. So that's where we're saying, by defining yourself beyond your personal safety, by defining yourself as something essential.
No, he called not to wear yarmulke in public.
Right.
So back home you can.
You could put it on. Yeah.
So still, you would say, because I don't honestly don't I see the point in both positions, but I don't know. So essentially, is it really hiding your own self, hiding your identity, your inner Jew, or is it just looking at the reality and acting accordingly?
Right. That's a good question. I think from at least Western European history, in less than 100 years, you had Germans that weren't with yarmulkes, and German Jews without yarmulkes, and they were upstanding German citizens married to German women, and it didn't matter.
Nowadays in Europe, it's more a crime of opportunity.
Right.
So they see a Jew, somebody can see a Jew and can jump with a knife, you know, and it's not an organized persecution where they find the address,
Right.
So this, better not to stand out. And
so you're saying it could be it's a different type of analysis of the threat as opposed to it being staged back.
Systematically,
it's more random.
Right.
So if you're finding yourself as a target of random violence, then why be the target?
Yeah.
Which would be a different scenario than what Haman represents. Haman represents state-backed.
Right.
Violence.
It's a systematic persecution and extermination.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is acts of pride going to
Would it do
This
more
is like
harm than
kind of like playground wisdom, right? Like if the bully pushes you down, do you avoid the bully so that you're safe from getting pushed down a second time, or do you stand up to the bully? What's more likely to keep you from getting pushed down the second time? I guess.
if there is a second time.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point. Yeah. Getting pushed is different than getting
Yeah,
stabbed, right?
exactly.
Yeah. These are good questions.
Well, I mean, you are a visible target versus somebody who hates that, not necessarily you,
Right.
who hates a symbol,
I hate the icon. Right.
who hates a Jew.
Right.
You are a visible target.
Right.
Like some Indian were here killed because of
Right.
extremist Muslims. And
Yeah, I actually.
so it is, I think, avoidance.
It's
Rather than-
reasonable caution, you can say, right? I mean, precaution.
I'll tell you the time that it was real. It happened to me. I experienced it. It didn't happen to me directly, but I experienced it. I was in graduate school when the Twin Towers were attacked in New York, and I went to Rutgers, which is across the river from Manhattan. The Newark campus is right across the Hudson River. You could see Manhattan in the skyline from Newark. And so, it was a time of turmoil, it's attack. So at that time, I was in a class. I remember clearly it was the marketing class, and my professor was a Sikh Indian. But so he had a turban, but he's Indian. He's not a Muslim, but he's brown-skinned with a turban. So we had school closed for a couple of days after the attack, and the first class back to the marketing class, Professor Jagpal was without his turban. He had this great long hair flowing down. And
Uncut hair, right?
yeah, so I experienced it the first time, and he said this very thing. He's like, even though I'm a Sikh, and this is part of my beliefs, but no one knows that. I just look like a brown person with a turban on, so why should I be standing out? Yeah, so the first time I ever saw, like in real life, this choice.
Wearing the turban is a choice.
Right.
You don't have to, even
Right.
if you're a Sikh.
Right. Which I guess you could put along the same lines as a yarmulke. A yarmulke is not
yarmulke is the
it's not a
symbol.
biblical obligation. It's also like
It's you cover
Right.
your head to show. And in that sense, if you put something on top of that,
a baseball
You are-
cap or something,
yeah.
right?
and lots of people do it,
Right.
or even if you see those people wearing the black hat under that, they have
Right.
a yarmulke.
Sure.
So wearing a second layer is not.
Right.
It's only what you think when you do it, what again counts.
Yeah.
Are you hiding that you are a Jew, or you are being careful?
Right.
How you feel about that?
Right.
I think it's a part of it as well
Yeah, it makes it more complicated, sure, like in practice.
as everything.
Yeah. And I think we're drawing an important distinction between the big picture, like a war against God, like anti-Semitism has been throughout history, versus random acts of violence against others. Probably the same person in France who's stabbing a Jew is stabbing a Muslim, who's stabbing a Sikh, is stabbing anybody who's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's less like standing up for the essence of who you are, and these are complicated matters, I guess. All right. Any other questions or? Special for David, we ended just